if you're like me, then you've encountered these people before. Um, People who say that Bernie Sanders is just another tax and spend liberal who wants to grow the size of the federal government and wants to take away your freedoms. And this is a very, very, very common talking point used by the right. But if you ask them to explain it, a lot of people will have a lot of difficulty explaining it because they don't really understand what this talking point means. And they also fundamentally don't understand the reality of the world in which we live in because they're so clouded by their ideological stance. So specifically, what am I talking about? All right. If you ask most libertarians to define the role of government, they'll say that government is supposed to just print or coin money, and they're supposed to raise an army for the national defense. They believe in a very, very, very strict interpretation of the Constitution, and that power should be concentrated not in the hands of the federal government, but in the states. But my question to you, and people who believe this, is what if you live in a state that doesn't care about you? What if you live in a state that cares more about the factories that are there, that don't care about your water supply? I'm going to post a link in this video to an RT News report showing states and cities across the country whose water supply are directly threatened right now. It's not just Flint, Michigan. It's happening everywhere. Crystal City, Texas. And not just there. There was a recent study that came out that said over 4,900 bridges across the country are dangerously in need of repair and could collapse at any minute. What are the states doing to address these problems? What about the idea of systemic racism? You know, if the states and the state's justice system is obviously corrupt, like in the case of Cincinnati, Ohio, doesn't the federal government have a role to step in to protect the citizens of the country? Aren't people first and foremost citizens, residents, inhabitants of the United States of America, and a resident of a state second? When you say the Pledge of Allegiance, who do you say that to? Do you say that to a state or do you say that to the United States? Understand that Bernie Sanders is the only one that actually believes in a small government and changing the system that we currently have. And his ideas are realistic. Specifically, what am I talking about? Whenever people talk about big government, they're not talking about the military industrial complex that sucks more than 57% of our annual budget. They're not talking about that. They're not talking about the financial industry that's allowed to get away with fraud and will never get prosecuted over it because they're too big to fail. They're not talking about corporations directly threatening your water supply and your property values by fracking in your neighborhood or running pipelines or having leakages that they don't fix for months, like what happened in California. They're not talking about any of that. No, all of that's cool. They're not talking about Republicans trying to outlaw getting a freaking blowjob in Michigan. They're not talking about any of that. They're not talking about insurance companies getting in between you and your doctor, telling your doctor what he can and can perform on you because they will refuse to pay the bill, or telling you what hospital you need to go to because if it's outside of their coverage network, they're just not going to pay and you'll die. That's not what they're talking about. What they're talking about when they talk about big government is policies that help you. Policies that help ordinary people at the expense of corporate profits. The reasons why the establishment hates Bernie is not because he's a communist, it's not because he's a socialist, it's not because he's promising free stuff like they like to say. It's because he's promising justice, fairness, and equality. And he's really has a plan to shrink the size of the federal government. Yes, you heard me right. If defense accounts for 57% of the budget, then wouldn't cutting defense and shrinking the amount that we spend on defense be shrinking the size of the budget? Think about it. Wouldn't ending CIA mass surveillance and fighting for your civil rights, your rights to privacy, wouldn't that be limiting the size of government? Wouldn't staying out of your life, out of your bedroom, and not giving a shit about whether or not you smoke weed, isn't that limiting the size of the federal government, shrinking it? No. What people and libertarians like to attack is stuff that helps you. Bernie Sanders is the only one who gets it. And he's the only one who, the only national liberal I see that's actually okay with you having your gun rights. He's not just for banning guns for the sake of banning guns, like what Hillary is proposing and bragging about. You have a constitutional right to bear arms. The question is, should we give guns to everybody, unlimited, even if it means getting into the hands of the wrong people, people who are mentally ill, people with criminal records? Think about it. Bernie Sanders is not trying to grow the federal government or increase your taxes or doing anything evil. He's not planning to nationalize anything. What he's simply doing is trying to create a system of fairness, a system of equality, a system that we once had, a system that we can have again. So stop living in fear and just, don't trust what I have to say. Evaluate the policies yourself. Keep an open mind. And you'll see what I see as well. And let's do this by the numbers. Over 170 economists agree with Bernie Sanders. There are studies that show that his economic plans would absolutely obliterate the deficit before the end of his first term. Gone, surplus. He saves us $5 trillion. That's the net savings that Bernie Sanders' his policies would bring. And I'll post a couple links in here so you can see some of the stuff that I'm talking about. I'm not asking you to vote for Bernie Sanders. I'm asking you to open your mind. Thank you.